Hi John, thank you so much for inviting us today. Here we are at the Grand Lodge of England, yes?
That's right.
We've come today for you to talk to us today all about Freemasons. Yes. Now, many people see the secrecy around Freemasons, but you say in your words, it's not a secret society, it's a society with some secrets. Is that how you would put it?
I'm not quite sure that that's how we would put it today. Certainly not a secret society.
Okay.
There are certain aspects, particularly in ritual, which we would regard as private rather than secret, although in the language of the ritual they're described as the secrets of Masonry. But in fact, we have been for a very long time a very open organisation. This building we're in is open to the public. People can come in. We do tours of the building. We have a wonderful library and museum, which the public can come in, consult the books, bring stuff in for identification and advice, ask questions, do any sort of research from family history to research into Freemasonry itself. That's
right. I mean, you can actually go onto the website and you just type in Freemasons and the Grand Lodge of England, and up it'll pop with all this information. So people have this misconception about it being a secret society, but really you are quite open. As you say, people can come here on tours. Obviously there's areas and sections like many buildings that would not be open to the public, but generally as far as you can do, you have quite an open policy on what you give out information wise.
We certainly do, and that in a sense is because for a period we were regarded as being over-secretive, overprotective of our privacy. And that came about largely because of events in the late 1930s and the Second World War. Before that, we were very public. It was an era when, particularly the 18th, 19th, early 20th century, where people went in for public processions for all sorts of national or local celebrations, and as well as the local civic dignitaries and the church leaders and the local town band, the Freemasons in their regalia would be part of it. We used to do foundation stone layings of building with everybody there, that sort of thing. We ran 2 weekly newspapers and a magazine, which you could buy at the W.H. Smith or on the station newsstands, that sort of thing. Then towards the end of the 1930s, because of what was happening in Russia, Spain, Germany, Italy with the fascists and the communists, who for I think obvious reasons, but the public might not see it as being so obvious, didn't like Freemasonry because we stand for tolerance and freedom of thought and helping others. Took against Freemasonry, and in those countries it became a very dangerous thing to be a Freemason. Freemasonry was banned. In Mussolini's Italy, a lot of people went to prison. Franco's Spain, a lot of Freemasons were rounded up and quite a number of them died in prisons. And then when the Nazis took power in Germany, the first thing they did was to close down Freemasonry. And an awful lot of Freemasons, not just in Germany, but when war broke out and the Nazis moved into occupying most of Europe, as well as seizing Jews and Jewish property, they would round up the local Freemasons, take stuff from the local masonic halls back to Berlin, and built up a network, and a lot of people went into labour and concentration camps simply because they were Freemasons. The local example of that was, of course, the Channel Islands were occupied, and shortly after the occupation, 2 beautiful Victorian Masonic halls, one in Jersey, one in Guernsey, all the contents of those were seized, shipped off to Berlin, and were put on public display in Berlin at the height of the war.
Where are they now? Are they still there?
They disappeared, unfortunately. At the end of the war, a lot of stuff went to East Germany and Russia after the war, and a lot of the stuff that went to Russia, mainly documents and lodgment books and books and things like that. Most of the artifacts and regalia and stuff never seen again.
That's very sad. Now you say during the Second World War, I mean we're rushing on here actually, but during the Second World War that a lot of Freemasons were locked up because I think it was in your quotes, freedom of thought and freedom of speech, which is very much a plateau that I like to think that we still have today, that we can still speak our mind in the freedom of things that we believe which is wrong. So this is really what the Freemasons is all about, is freedom of speech, freedom of thought.
That comes
Or
into
it's part of it,
That's
yes.
part of it. We have what we call three great principles, which in the language of the ritual are brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Yes.
Brotherly love is fraternity, sociability, tolerance, the idea that people have the right to have their own opinions. You might not agree with them, you might heartily disagree with them, but they have a right.
But they have a right to that opinion, yes, that
and you
thought.
have the right to have your opinions
Yes.
and your freedoms. Relief is charity in all its forms, not just collecting and giving out money, but giving service to the community, helping those who are less advantaged. And one of the misunderstandings about Masonic charity is it's not simply inward looking.
No, I know, because the Masons have actually helped out a friend of mine, which was nothing to do with the Masons, so I know that they do this.
And truth is high standards, old-fashioned word morality, striving to do the best you can to deal with people honestly in everything you do, your private and your public and your work life.
If we can just talk about the lodges and how many there are and how big Freemasonry is, how many groups and how far it goes around the world. And when we've talked about that, if we can go right back to the beginning of where Freemasonry started.
Freemasonry is spread around the world. It started off somewhere in the British Isles. For historical reasons, there are separate Grand Lodges in England, Scotland and Ireland. The Grand Lodge of Ireland, despite the political divide, covers the north and the south. And it spread out from this country in the 18th century, taken by travelling lodges in regiments in the army, by people who went out, like the East India Company, merchants, settlers who were going out. And the development of Freemasonry overseas mirrors the development of the British Empire in the 18th and 19th, early 20th century. It's now basically every democratic country has its own Grand Lodge, which is the governing body. In some areas they call it a Grand Orient. So we have three, England, Ireland, Scotland here, most of the European countries. United States of America, because of the way it developed, there's a Grand Lodge in each state. There are probably something like 5 million Freemasons worldwide. International in
5 million?
5 million.
5 million.
International in the sense that it is spread around the world, but each Grand Lodge is independent. There isn't a sort of world governing body.
Is there different rules and regulations and rituals in different lodges, or are they all very similar?
Similar basis, they have what we call the same basic principles.
Okay.
But as Freemasonry spread out and was taken up in various parts of the world, local traditions, local culture obviously affected. So if I was to go to a lodge, say, in Germany or France or Italy, I would recognise the basics, but there might be differences of detail in the way the ceremonies were carried out. Same basic principles and the same ideas.
Now, you have ways to recognise a Freemason. Obviously, I won't ask you how to divulge those, because everything has their own little traits. So everybody knows, even if they're from a different country, how to recognise a Freemason.
Yeah, we have what we call the traditional modes of recognition,
Yeah.
the handshake and signs and passwords, which we don't use indiscriminately. They're used in a Masonic context. It's a way of proving that you are. If I was to go to the USA and I had a spare evening and I wanted to experience American Masonry, I would turn up where the local lodge was. They obviously wouldn't know me from Adam. I might have my Grand Lodge certificate saying I'd been made a Mason here, but I would expect to be tested, and they would run me through the handshakes and the passwords and the signs of these as a test of membership. We are very careful to impress on members that they shouldn't do that indiscriminately. And you hear all sorts of stories about people saying, that people made a Masonic sign of me. If they did that, they would have problems with us, because that would be misusing their membership. And I have to say, in nearly 40 years I've been a Freemason, I can think of only a couple of occasions where I've been at something non-Masonic, where I've detected somebody trying to give me a Masonic handshake. And I've been very wary of that person after that, because they are knowingly not standing up to the rules.
Exactly. Now, what about people who want to join Freemasonry? There must be tests or kind of guidelines that you have where you turn some people down.
It can happen. Like all membership associations, you are proposed by two members who know you into a lodge. You join the lodge. In a lot of cases, mine for example, it was a family thing. So one of my father and one of my uncles proposed me into the lodge that they were a member of. Other people come in through friends or work colleagues. But we quite often get people now, they see the website, they get in touch here, they say, I'm interested, I don't think I know any Freemasons, and we will introduce them to Freemasons in their local area and go from there. Prime qualification for admission into Freemasonry is you must have a belief in God.
Right. I was going to ask about the religion side of it, yes.
How you express that, what your religion is entirely a matter for you. But you must have that basic
That's
belief.
the primary.
That's the thing which links us all, is that we all, whether we're Christian in whatever denomination, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, Parsi, we all have, and that's a rule that we call a landmark.
Do you call that the divine creator or the great architect?
We have a number of expressions like the great architect, which enables people to refer to God without giving offence to anybody who's there. That gets misunderstood in that you often hear people say, oh, the Masons have their own God. No, the great architect to me is the God I worship.
The supreme
to a Jew, it really is God.
It's who they worship, yes.
It's not a combining, it's not a separate Masonic God. So you have to have a basic...
So you wouldn't have an atheist? No, basically, yeah.
That's it, not an atheist. Apart from that, and because one of our great principles is truth, morality, high standards, someone with a criminal record, it would be unlikely that they would come in. But when someone is proposed, they're interviewed by a committee of the lodge, and they would ask them all sorts of questions about themselves, what they think Freemasonry is and how they would go on. And that is done because people do misunderstand Freemasonry. And you get people who, when they've gone through the interview, said, oh, well, it's not for me, because they thought, as we've been accused in the past, that Freemasonry is a network and it will get you on in life, it will get you on in business. And one of the things that is made very plain with people from the first contact onwards is that that's a no-no. If you use it for your own or anybody else's advantage, then that's breaking our rules, and you're out. But apart from that, there are no special qualifications. We believe Freemasonry is there to bring people together who, in, again, nice 18th century language, would otherwise stand at a perpetual distance. We're interested, we know what divides people, which is why the two subjects we don't talk about in a Masonic meeting are politics and religion.
Right, yeah. Well, that'll kick up a storm anyway, won't it? Politics and religion.
But we want to know how people can get on together, how they can get over those difficulties of politics and religion, so you don't discuss.
Well, something must be working, because you have members all over the world and thousands, well, 5 million of them actually. So you must be doing something right.
I think we are in a way, and it's one of the things that we're sort of quietly proud of. That there's been a lot of talk recently with the bicentenary of the abolition of slavery, and we've had a proud record for nearly 300 years now of ignoring the things that have divided people in the past and bring them together. Regardless of what might be happening outside. And in the 18th century in England, still a huge amount of anti-Semitism. Jews were welcomed into Freemasonry. When Freemasonry was taken to places like India, no problem with Indians joining the lodges, that sort of thing. And we've gone that direction, promoting tolerance, trying to bring people together to find out what they've got in common so they can build on that for the good of the community as a whole.
Now, I noticed on your website, I had a look at the people who had been Masons in the past and currently, and there's people from all different walks of life. You know, there's sportsmen and there's poets, there's entertainers, and I noticed Peter Sellers was one of them, and Rudyard Kipling. There's quite a few, so it is interesting that it attracts people from every angle of life.
It does, and again, this is the bringing people together.
Yes.
We say once you're within Freemasonry and the context of a lodge meeting, everybody's equal. The differences of social standing and everything disappear, and everybody's equal and has an equal opportunity of serving in the lodge. So having worked when I was running Library and Museum here with our membership registers for a long period, we were always had a representation of the whole of society in our lodges, everything from ordinary working people up to members of the aristocracy, members of the royal family, of course.
Now, it's interesting because obviously we're talking about these members who have been members over the centuries really. What about women members?
Women can be Freemasons. Not under the United Grand Lodge of England. We continued the tradition when we were formed back in 1717, when Freemasonry was originating, because the position of women was different in society. They didn't join clubs and associations. We preserved that tradition. But for over 100 years, there has been a system whereby there are female lodges. And in fact, the Order of Women Freemasons celebrated their centenary last year with a huge meeting at Royal Albert Hall last June. And they equally are a women-only organisation. We meet at a senior level because anything going on affects us, and we talk about that. But we don't visit each other's lodges, and we don't mix in that way. But we have a huge amount of respect for what they do. And so if a woman wants to be Freemason, there is the opportunity of doing it. To
come in there. So that's gone for 1 century, basically. Yes. Whose idea was that to bring them in?
It came from France. In the late 19th century, the Grand Lodge of France, which was the main Grand Lodge in France at that stage, started what they called lodges of adoption, in which they, to bring the ladies in. That became a body called co-masonry, which was mixed men and women. They introduced a lodge into London in 1904, and then around about 1910, 1911, the women decided that they wanted to work on their own without the male members, and have continued doing so ever since. And they work very much in the way that we do.
The same ceremonies,
same ceremonies, regalia, do a tremendous amount of charity on a local basis.
Great stuff. Right, now you're going to take us on a tour, aren't you, of this fantastic building, and the architecture around here is absolutely amazing, because it's Freemasonry. So I guess a lot of work and time has gone into building this place. But just before we leave this fantastic room, if you can just tell us about this chap here in the painting.
As I said, we've had a close connection with the royal family for 250 years. This is the George, Prince of Wales, probably best remembered as the Prince Regent, and then King George IV. And he was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England as Prince of Wales from 1791 to 1830.
You've brought us to this fantastic room, and the architecture in here is just amazing. But the room itself actually holds the memorial to the soldiers who died, I believe, in the First World War. And this is the casket. If you could tell us about this.
This is the memorial casket, and it's got a roll in it which can be turned, which lists the nearly 3,000 English Freemasons who were killed on active service.
Oh, English Freemasons, okay.
Killed on active service in the First World War. But in fact, the whole building is the memorial. Grand Lodge has been in Great Queen Street since 1775. And this is the third building, and at the end of the First World War they wanted to find a way of commemorating all those, not just English Freemasons but all Freemasons who had given their lives in the First World War, and we needed a new headquarters, so they decided to rebuild Freemasons Hall as a memorial to those who had given their lives. But they didn't want to call it a war memorial, so it was called the Masonic Peace Memorial. And the whole building was known as that until peace ceased at the outbreak of the Second World War, and we went back to calling it Freemasons Hall. But you're quite right. It's probably the least known gem of Art Deco architecture in certainly London, and probably the whole of the country.
When I first came here on one of the tours a few years ago, and I walked into this room, and it just absolutely took my breath away, because myself as an artist, I can appreciate how much work has actually gone into this, and you can see by the ceilings, which we'll show on camera in a while. But it's absolutely amazing. So a lot of time and dedication has gone into that.
They were determined as a memorial it was going to be the best. And despite all the economic problems in the 1920s and early 30s, when the building was being built, they raised £1.3 million voluntary subscriptions from the membership, and were determined that the design was going to be the best, and all the materials that were used, which we're now a grade 2 star listed building inside and out, which is quite a headache to look after.
I can imagine, actually, because there's always kind of rules and regulations when it's listed, and you can't do this without the permission, and lots of red tape going on behind it. But you can see a lot of people have put the time and dedication into it, which is, it's absolutely fantastic. If you can just tell us a little bit about the stained glass windows, because they're on 3 sides here. If we can talk about this one first.
The memorial window, of course, shows the Angel of Peace, the dates of the First World War. The angel is carrying a model of the what is actually the tower of this building, which probably people recognise because it doubles as the headquarters of MI5,
yes,
the BBC spoof
we've
series.
seen that, yes.
And round it you have representatives of the various services that were involved in the war, and various stonemasons, and of course references back to King Solomon, because the rituals of the lodge are based on the building of King Solomon's
that is
temple.
actually something I really wanted to ask you about. How far does it go back? Because we know that it is connected with the temple of King Solomon, and is it that the architecture is built around the King Solomon's structure? Not itself, of course, because that's in Jerusalem, we believe.
Architecture, very important. As the Americans would say, the $64,000 question is, where did we start, and
Yes.
why and when?
Yes.
And there's a huge amount of scholarly discussion gone on for over 100 years without really coming up with the answer. We believe we started sometime in the late 1500s, early 1600s, and that was a period when politics and religion dominated everybody's lives. And
What they don't today, then?
not quite in the same way. And it was down to things like, after the founding of the Church of England and things like that, there was a political view which went with your religious view. And of course it led to civil war in this country in the 1630s. And people often forget that the Civil War wasn't just about politics, it was also a religious war. And we think that those who originated Freemasonry, they were trying to find a way of bridging that gap. They knew what divided people. They were far more interested in finding out how they could bring people together, forget the differences of politics and religion, and see what they had in common and how they could build on that for the good of the community.
Amazing. We can just talk about the casket itself.
The casket itself is a certain amount of Egyptian influence in the design of the building, and it's based apparently on the architect's idea of something that would have floated down the Nile to carry the memory, and it has decorations on the top. You've got representatives of the 4 services that were involved.
Yes, I was just looking at those, actually.
And on the front you've got various St George of England, King Solomon, Moses, who of course, the basis of Christian morality is the 10 Commandments, but those commandments seem to be the basis of morality in all religions. So Moses is depicted there with the tablets, and like everything in Freemasonry, everything has a symbolism.
Could you just explain the 4 services they involved?
The 4 services were the Army, the Navy, the Royal Flying Corps as it was there, and of course the Merchant Navy Service, who were very important bringing stuff in to keep things going.
Now, I've noticed on the leaflets for the Freemasons, there is angels. There's like a symbol, but there's like angels with wings. Can you explain that? Is it angels?
It's. I'm not sure they're angels in that sense. They. You quite often find on all sorts of either Masonic things or things where you've got Masonic decoration. You'll find sun and the moon and normally seven. They look a little bit like Renaissance cherubs with flying wings, and that's just representative of the heavens and eternity.
Now we've come to the entrance of the Grand Temple. But before we do take the journey through the doors, if we can just have a look around this room and you can just explain the designs in the floor and the ceiling and especially the history behind this magnificent door itself and what it's made of.
Yeah. The floor reflects the ceiling and it's a multifaceted star. Which takes us back again to the idea of eternity and the afterlife there's a little joke when we bring visitors around. The centre is lapis lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone.
I know, it's one of my favourites actually.
And the guides usually warn that anybody seen getting a penknife out of their pocket will be escorted from the building.
It's quite rare these days actually.
It is, very rare. And ceiling is probably one of the most magnificent painted ceilings of its period. And again, as with Art Deco, lots of geometric patterns, which ties in with Freemasonry, architecture being based on geometry, squares, levels.
That's right, there's this set, square and compass.
The square and compasses, yes, they're the most common emblem for Freemasonry. Square is morality, and the compasses remind you to keep within due bounds within the circle of things. But the doors are probably the thing that most people remark on. They were quite an engineering feat in their day. They were the largest single castings when they were cast in South London in 1931.
That's amazing.
And each door is 1.25 tons of solid bronze.
Who carried it?
Or
how did they carry
quite
it?
a few people. Probably a crane job. But
Probably before they put the roof on, I guess.
But they, again, full of symbolism and tell a story. To become what we call a Master Mason, you go through 3 ceremonies, which are, because we're talking about building and bringing people together, when the ritual was being originated in the 16 and early 1700s, the main source book for allegory was the Bible. Right. And the only building that's described in any detail in the Bible, and it's done twice, is King Solomon's temple, which was also seen as the ideal of the perfect temple, both an actual temple and the temple that we all try to build within ourselves. So on the doors you've got the preparation of the stone and the metalwork, the bringing of timber from Tyre, the making of the timber for the temple, weaving the veils of the temple, bringing in incense and precious metals, and then right at the top you've got the dedication procession through Jerusalem once the temple was finished, bringing in the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and the other furnishings for the temple.
And you've got the pillars with the wheat? Yeah?
Yes.
Wheat? It is wheat?
It is wheat. Wheat, sign of plenty and abundance. The 2 pillars, which were said to have stood at the entrance of Solomon's temple, and on the top they have, although they're a little bit indistinct, globes. One terrestrial, one celestial, pointing out that Freemasonry is universal.
Right.
And in the centre, a Hebrew symbol for God.
Which is the circle with the triangle?
The circle with the triangle.
Okay. And what's the wave in the middle?
That's the Hebrew symbol standing for God.
Now, a lot of people associate the pyramid, so I take it, is this to do with the pyramid? With
no,
the Freemasons?
Pyramid came into Masonic iconography in the late 1700s. In the 1790s, Napoleon went on an expedition to Egypt, took a lot of archaeologists, historians and artists with him. And it had a huge influence on art and design throughout Europe when the discoveries that they made. And it also came into Masonic iconography because in those days wisdom and learning was supposed to be from the East. Well, today we would regard what we call the Far East as being the East, but in the 18th century, late 1700s, the East was, of course, the Gulf area now, Egypt and what are now Iraq, Iran and Syria and places like that. So the pyramid was seen, again, as a sign of wisdom.
Was Napoleon a Freemason?
There's a huge amount of argument, no documentary evidence that he was. He certainly used, or we would say misused, Freemasonry. It was closed down after the French Revolution for a while, and then Napoleon allowed the Grand Orient to start meeting again, but to control it, he put his brothers and a lot of his marshals into the senior positions in it, and was using it politically for a while, and then they went off.
Do you know anything about Napoleon's experience when he went into one of the, I think it was one of the Great Pyramids of Giza? He had an experience. Do you know anything about that?
No, hasn't come across my radar.
Okay, I just wondered. So we see the pyramid symbol here, and as I say, people associate the pyramid symbol with the Freemasons, which you say it has come into the architecture. So can you explain the pyramid which is on the American dollar, which a lot of people associate that, and then there's the gap at the top? Do you understand what that means? Is that part of Freemasonry?
No,
it's not. Okay.
And what people
I just wanted to try to clear this up.
Because there are a lot of conspiracy theories about Freemasonry and the founding of America and things, simply because a number of the founding fathers, including George Washington, were Freemasons. Benjamin Franklin and people like that. But the dollar bill, of course, didn't come in to being until about the 1850s, 1860s, which was a long time after. And it is actually part of one of the American seals. And again, it's the pyramid being a symbol of learning, of education. And then on the top of it, the all-seeing eye of God, which has been, you find it in Masonic symbolism, but it has also been a general symbol for God
for a long
almost
time.
as long as man's existed.
But, so there's no connection as such? Okay, just wanted to clear that up. Right, if that's okay with you, then we'll take a journey through the doors.